Good afternoon, everybody. So, introduce myself.
Sorry.
Let me just see, what can I say? So, I'm the director of the UNESCO Child and Family Research Centre across the road, as Caroline and Ian have said. I'm the UNESCO Professor in Children, Youth and Civic Engagement. And actually, it is helpful to set the context for what I'm going to talk about, because really, I suppose I want to talk about where I'm coming from, which is more than 30 years in applied social research, in leadership roles for the last 20 or so in the centre. And just to say, my presentation today is intentionally non-technical. What I want to is just to think a little bit and work towards and encourage a kind of a person-centred, reflexive approach to thinking about evidence and policy. So in other words, what I'm thinking about is starting with the research side. So Brendan talked about the other side, and I was thinking about, seances and the rest of it when he said the other side. Maybe the people on the other side are dead in our eyes. Sometimes they're not really. So just maybe to think about it from the research side. And then specifically, the presentation is really brief. And if I go over time, just stop you, Brendan. The presentation is really framed by a set of questions. And what I want is for people and everybody here, even if you're well experienced, it doesn't really matter, just to begin to think and respond to the questions as I'm talking, if that's okay. So the first question I want to raise is, who am I? And that's really to do with identity, and already some of the themes have been raised in the two inputs. So what's your professional motivation to be, if you want, an academic? Is it to be an excellent scholar, full stop? Is it to make an impact in your field, in the scientific, in the journals and so on? Or is it to make a difference in society? And I was struck by Ian's comment at the start about the mission of Quorum. It's quite policy focused. It is actually about making a difference in the same way our centre is. But even if it's lower on your priority, where does it fit on your priority list? Because the prioritisation of these matters then affects how much you're going to invest in it and how much it kind of comes back to you in terms of who you are. My professional identity started with first work I did in 1993, I think it was, looking at and it was kind of funny, outcomes from child protection social work. And you can imagine that's whatever number of years ago. And this was not on the agenda, I can tell you, back then, really thinking about these matters. But from then, my trajectory has always been about making a difference. So in a sense, it's easy for me. It's part of who I am. It's really prominent in terms of identity. But clearly, it's not for everybody. But at the same time, and maybe the idea is there, even in teams, should there be somebody who is a little bit more committed to that policy influence? Our centre's identity has been explicitly about making a difference from the get-go, so that influence is hardwired. And obviously then, if you're a chemist or if you're, a biological scientist of some kind, maybe that piece is not really there and in your formation. And again, that issue of how we train the future researchers, the future academics, the reality of it is, in spite of what people might think, any competitive European funding is so much about impact now that it has to be there. And when we think about the Marie Curie doctoral training programs and all of these kinds of things, it's fundamental. So, and even for a theorist, a theory of the language of Joyce, for example, that still has to be somewhere fitting into the world. And maybe the impact is in terms of, cultural tourism. Of course, not everything that we do has to be instrumental, and it shouldn't be. There should be plenty of blue sky, but the reality is that our work does get out there somehow. So identity, who we are, is an important first question. Second question is, what do I know about and what's my expertise? Again, the nature of academic and scientific work, social scientific and STEM and whatever, and the arts and humanities, is that we become very specialised very quickly in our careers. So the question is then, well, what's the opportunity? I would say that it depends on the issue. It might be that an early career researcher has that opportunity because that bit of knowledge about that particular chemical reaction, that particular aspect of, let's say, the future of AI or whatever it is, the work that they're doing might be exactly what somebody needs at that point. So it's not to say that an early career researcher can't have that impact from that maybe more narrow knowledge base. most of the time we think about this in terms of, that experienced researcher who has accumulated, I suppose, their specialist knowledge, and that has grown and grown and grown. But critically, the capacity to work in an interdisciplinary basis so they can actually engage in policy dialogues and bring in some of those areas because they have enough familiarity to it. So again, I suppose thinking about that, really, in our centre, we're lucky. We have, 5 thematic areas at the moment where we look at mentoring, we look at youth participation, we look at empathy, we look at family support, we look at alternative education. And that means that we have that expertise, that capacity, that's our knowledge base. And we can think about and be ready for policy influence on that basis. So, interestingly enough, we got a call or an email before Christmas from a Joint Oireachtas Committee on social media and young people. And my initial thought was, oh my God, I said, why are they asking me to go to a Joint Oireachtas Committee? I do not research in this area. And of course, I talked to more wise people than me and said, no, you must go to this. And of course, then we began to think about, empathy in the context of, engagement on social media, the role of parents in the context of social media. And then we realised we put together a nice position paper, and we presented. So again, it's that idea of having that knowledge and also thinking about your expertise in relation to the issue. So it mightn't be directly apparent. So that's a little bit about, I suppose, what I know. So again, identity, expertise. Emily talked about this. Who do I know? The contacts and networks. Again, beginning to think about, look, we have a plethora of models and frameworks for policy influence. We have a body of research, particularly in the United States, going back the better part of 30 or 40 years on this area. But all of them, and regardless of the theoretical perspective, the in practice perspective is about the relationship. It's about the capacity to make the connection with a person and our network. Our centre, we have built up a strong relationship with key sectors in government in terms of delivery agencies and child protection, in terms of the NGO community. Part of that relates to, it's kind of contingent, it related to the previous leader of our centre, whose background was in services, who, when we formed our research centre, had already been on the policy kind of level, engaged at that level. So we were able to kind of nurture and mine that and develop it, but also really commit to it and say that it's something that is important to us. Two quick examples, I suppose, on this contacts and networks. Our biggest study for the last number of years was an evaluation study of a programme of change in child protection in Ireland that kind of the research value was about 2.1 million, which was a lot for a social science research. But that came about because we had a long-standing contact with somebody in the services side. We worked with them in developing a programme, and we went alongside them then with a research and evaluation study. And that, it's not about, if you want, being too instrumental. It was kind of natural for us. For others, it might have to be a bit more instrumental. It might have to be a bit more intentional towards, that's what I want to achieve. Another example forthcoming is we're going to run our third public policy innovation seminar, which we've done with people, and Brendan referred to them earlier on, in the Department of the Taoiseach, looking at implementation, the third pillar of the policy handbook. And again, that's based on long-standing relationships we've evolved with the Department of the Taoiseach. And we're fortunate to have those kinds of connections. But again, we work on them. So that's a little bit about the who I know, the contacts and networks. And again, thinking for yourselves, who do I know and who do I want to know maybe, and what should I do about making those connections? I suppose what can I influence, again, is about understanding your field. It's understanding your policy field. So you have your academic and your scientific expertise, but how does that relate to what areas of policy? And as I said earlier, it's about thinking beyond maybe the narrow piece and into the wider piece. So again, issues of climate, the example is perfect. Who's joining up, reproductive health and climate change, up until the last while? It's really interesting. So it's about thinking beyond your expertise area and so on. one example for us on that is empathy research. So we've started that work on empathy research with a small grant a number of years ago, but in partnership with colleagues in the School of Education and Children's Studies. And notably in that capacity to actually understand, okay, so we've got this really interesting work on empathy. We want to develop that, we want to translate that scientific knowledge into something for practice. So how do we get that moving? Where does it go? And it's through the or the School of Education and Children's Study colleagues who know schools, who know how education policy works, that we were able to get that across. So now the work that we've done is on the curriculum of the junior cert and the transition year. So it's part of, it's an optional reach in for one of their curricular areas, which really is a kind of, again, thinking about that's where we wanted to go and we followed it. Another example is our forthcoming conference on youth participation. And our intention is, our byline is next level youth participation. And what we're saying here is we want, clearly, and Brendan is working as part of the impact subcommittee on that conference, we want to impact policy. We're not satisfied to say, come, talk and leave it. We're saying we have to have policy messages to come from that, and we really want to bring them forward. So again, that's the idea of what can I influence? And we're clear about that, and we're clear about some of the mechanisms. And then finally, when can I influence? And that's to do with questions of time and timing. And it's already been said, it's the long and winding road. So again, looking at idea of identity, expertise, contacts and networks and understanding the policy area, that kind of nearly always does take that little bit of, time to build up. So time in this context as duration, it does really tend to be a long and winding road overall. As I said, sometimes it is the moment that you have the ideas, you have the knowledge to make the difference. But it's also a little bit about, the time as investment, because it takes time. You have to commit to it. So again, how that gets done, is it done by an individual that takes the lead in a team or not, as Emily suggests, or whatever. And it's also about timing, and it's about the window. And of course, in the policy world, there's plenty of terms for this, but a policy window, Brenda, Overton window, this idea like that at that moment there's a need for something and you're the person who can get in there with your ideas, your thinking to frame the direction of travel and policy. And I suppose the implication for this in terms of the when can I, it's the readiness, it's the willingness to be ready to go and to take part. Our centre, we operated as a very small unit essentially for maybe 6 or 7 years, and there was 3 of us, and then there was a window that opened because we had the policy connections, and somebody said to us, do you want money to work on a bigger scale as a children's research centre? And of course we walked straight into that. So that was delightful, we were thrilled, but again it was about being ready to go. But a kind of a more simple and prosaic example, the work that colleagues in our centre have led on alternative education, funded by Rethink Ireland, Cormac Forkin's work, and Cormac presented on one of these. We now have a convention on education coming up, which is a major kind of next transformational kind of work on educational provision in Ireland. And the work that we have done is going to be clearly part of that dialogue because of the actors involved and because of the nature of what we have to offer. So again, I suppose I just kind of finish up by think out from yourself. I mean, I could have done plenty on the other side if you want, but I was thinking coming in today, I'd really be interested in our side and who we are. So thinking about identity, thinking about what we know, thinking about our contacts and networks, thinking about where it is that we want to influence, and thinking about time and timing we're willing to contribute. So I hope that's a little bit helpful to our conversation, and I hope it is useful to you. So thanks very much.